Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm your host, Jaime Okan. Unmanned systems like drones are becoming a crucial part of the future of warfare. But what lessons can Taiwan take from the battlefields of Ukraine? Joining me today is Tim Mack. He's the editor of a defense blog based in Ukraine called the Counteroffensive. Tim, thank you for joining me.
Really great to be here.
I want to focus on the defense lessons that what we're seeing on the battlefields of Ukraine has taught the rest of the world, especially Taiwan. When you're covering Ukraine soldiers pushing back against Russia's aggression on the ground, what has been the biggest lesson that you learned so far in covering this conflict?
Well, I think the development of new technologies that will be useful in an asymmetric way has been one of the most important developments. So understanding the usefulness of attritable, that is destroyable, scalable, that means mass-produced drones, and how they've made a real difference for a smaller country to defend itself against a bigger country. I think there are a lot of lessons there in understand how they're using technology along with military strategy that Taiwan can take from Ukraine.
When you're on the ground in Ukraine, seeing them, what's the most common way, or can you give me a couple of examples of how drones are being used from the everyday level in terms of soldiers on the ground?
Well, there are a couple ways that drones can be used. If we're talking about aerial drones, one of the most important things that they're used for is aerial surveillance. So trying to figure out where enemy troops are, where enemy positions are, where enemy artillery is, what sort of forces they have, and then using that to relay back to other Ukrainian troops, okay, well, this is the battlefield situation, or this is where their assets are, this is where we should direct our artillery towards. So surveillance is one very important use for drones. But assault is another one. So this war has shown the usefulness of these so-called kamikaze drones that not only find enemy points of contact, but then go and destroy them. And that's what I mean by attritable and scalable, right? These are the kinds of drones that you can make a lot of them and then use them effectively as homing missiles into places that are enemy positions.
When you talk about attritable and making enough, from what you're seeing, does Ukraine have enough? How many are they using on a monthly basis?
Well, they're producing about 1 million drones per year, but they actually have the capacity to produce much more than that. They have the capacity nationwide to produce about 4 million drones per year. The thing is, though, that they don't have the funds or the resources to fulfill that capacity, right? I'm sure that the Ukrainians would want to purchase and produce more if they could, but they don't have the resources to do that. They do have the expertise to do that. And I think that after the war, when we get to the end of that, Ukraine will be a major exporter of defense technology around the world and their expertise. And that's something that Taiwan can rely on and touch upon as well.
When you talk about drones making, the potential to make 4 million, are these the small quadcopter FPV drones, or are there different kinds of drones that are used for different purposes from what you're seeing?
Yeah, there are a ton of different drones, from the small the small ones that can fit in my hand like this, or 4-engine quadcopters, one that's about, you have a ton of drones of different sizes for different capabilities and different missions, right? So when you're talking about aerial drones, the larger you are, the more capacity you have for range, the more you can pick up, which means you can have heavier munitions, which means bigger bang, right? And that's the trade-off. The bigger the thing, the more expensive the thing.
From what I've heard, Taiwan is trying to mass produce at least 7,000 drones a year. When you hear that number, and now that we're talking to lessons that can be applied in Taiwan, you listen to that 7,000 number, is that enough?
It's definitely not enough. But Taiwan is just at the beginning of starting to grow this. And the thing with defense technology is that it's difficult without full government backing. If they want to produce more, there's only one customer, right? The only customer in Taiwan that's going to be purchasing defense, lethal drones, is going to be the Taiwanese military and the Taiwanese government. And so it's not enough for the time being, but it's a start. And it's certainly it's certainly better than a lot of other countries who are not paying attention to some of the lessons learned in Ukraine. Taiwan has an urgency now to need to adapt some of these lessons quickly because they're under a situation that's much more threatening than the average country in the world. So it needs to produce more drones, and it needs to either produce them or purchase them from other places. But it's a start.
Let's get to the specific lessons for Taiwan in terms of producing the drones. You know, Taiwan is teaming up with a couple private companies right now to make sure that they can either create new drones or convert commercially available drones to military standard, military grade drones that can be used in the field. Is that something that we're seeing in Ukraine?
This is absolutely what we're seeing in Ukraine. And in fact, we're seeing them not only rely on private sector, but a very decentralized process of innovation. Before the full-scale invasion in 2022, Ukraine largely relied on state-run defense enterprises to produce their weaponry. But since 2022, we've seen 300 to 400 new defense startups emerge from almost nothing. And what they've done is, in a very decentralized manner, produce, customize, innovate, test, and create new things that never existed before. So all the things we're discussing now are lessons learned from trial, error, from the very first days of the war, what we call battlefield iteration, constantly trying new things, trying new technologies, and building things that don't exist yet. So the folks who are now working in defense technology in Ukraine, before the war they were working as engineers, and they were working as IT specialists and then programmers that never expected to work on military hardware and software. But because of the urgency of the war, it shifted dramatically the resources of society.
Taiwan recently announced that at least one person in each team of soldiers, group of soldiers, should be able to learn how to fly an FPV drone. When we look at the way to operate, how do we then promote people trying to learn how to fly these drones? Is this something that it's going to be required for military education going forward? That's
a really, really great step, I think, that the Taiwanese government is pushing for. Now, whether it will be implemented and effective in that right way, but it's a great goal. And as far as I know, the United States military hasn't adopted that particular goal at this time. I think they should. So Taiwan is, at least in terms of its ambition, is ahead of the curve in this. However, it does remain to be seen whether they can effectively train in a large scale people to do it. The great thing about drones, though, is that anyone who has used the PlayStation can kind of figure it out over a weekend. They might not be expert flyers immediately, but they're relatively easy to kind of pick up and go with. I purchased a drone in Ukraine, and I was fiddling around with it and tried to fly it and try to understand how it worked. I'm not an expert flyer. I crashed my drone, but I did pretty quickly get an intuitive sense about how to use it.
I would say multiply that by the millions of drones that Taiwan wants to build. Is that going to be, in your opinion, a credible deterrent? We've heard U.S. officials talk about turning the Taiwan Strait to a hellscape. Do you think shifting to that strategy of unmanned systems is a credible deterrent against China?
Well, what it is it's a deterrent that relies less on human lives. Right? That you can do this, you can create a deterrent while minimizing the danger to the soldiers who are operating these systems, right? So instead of having a boat with dozens of Taiwanese sailors on it in the straits, creating an active military deterrent, well, you could have unmanned surface vehicles or unmanned underwater vehicles that could be kind of drones in the water that would be able to be a deterrent, but without risking the lives of Taiwanese people in the process. So that's what the real step up for the use of these technologies. That's what really that relies on.
When we talked previously on the phone, I remember in person, you mentioned a story you're working on about a brigade of soldiers in Ukraine that are learning to use drones, or actually maybe there's no people in that brigade. Can you speak a little bit about that story you're working on?
Yeah, so actually we recently published it. So it's on Counteroffensive.pro, which is our publication that covers Ukrainian defense technology. And what we did is we had an exclusive story on the first ever all-drone combined arms assault by Ukrainian forces. So what that means, combined arms means both air and land resources. So what you had is dozens of Ukrainian drones rolling towards and flying towards a Russian position and working in concert together to attack and push out an entrenched Russian force. And that's what happened. A series of kamikaze ground drones and machine gun turret mounted ground drones attacked the position, along with surveillance drones and kamikaze aerial drones, and even a drone with a rifle mounted on it in the air. And that was something that was done for the first time. Now, in order to push an operation of that size, they needed about 100 people to operate these approximately 30 drones, but also to sustain them, create the logistics, do the planning. That whole force was required. But what's most important is that there were, at the time of the assault, there were 0 lives at risk at the position of the assault, right? So usually you'd have troops rushing position at great risk to their own lives. In this assault, it was just machines.
And I imagine it's much cheaper to do that kind of operation than to roll in, an American tank or some sort of infantry fighting vehicle. When you did that story and you looked at the results of that, are soldiers now becoming more receptive to that? Hey, wait a minute, maybe we can get more of these involved, so we're not in danger anymore.
Yeah, I think pretty much every soldier wants to do more lethal stuff with less risk to themselves, right? And so, this is just the first. This is the first operation of that kind. But you're going to see them try to scale that up and make it more complex with more drones, and see if it can be more effective as a result.
What would you recommend to Taiwan in terms of creating a strong deterrent to prevent China from even thinking about taking that step?
Well, what we're seeing in Ukraine is that a near-peer conflict involves competition around innovation. So the stuff that we're talking about right now, all these technologies that we're discussing, they weren't available in 2022. This is because the Russians have innovated, the Ukrainians have innovated. The Russians innovate back, the Ukrainians innovate back. So what can Taiwan do to create an environment in which innovation in a very, very fast way can be possible in the defense tech space? Can they ease up on some regulations around creating new things that might have military applications? Can they decentralize the procurement process in some ways to loosen sort of the central control that the Ministry of Defense has over all the development of these technologies? Are there ways to incentivize and help private defense companies grow their business and hire great engineers and creative thinkers? Those are all things that Taiwan can learn from this whole society, or this whole experience in the war. And I think that Taiwan would do well to try to purchase Ukrainian drones to understand some of the lessons, or to hire Ukrainian engineers to get some of that human capital involved in the development of a deterrent capability here.
From that military side, what about the civilian side? Is there a need to educate the public about, hey, listen, this could happen, here are the necessary steps to take if this is going to happen? Is that kind of education needed along with the military reform?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that you can create resilience in society by letting people know that they're not powerless. How do you create a sense that people are not powerless? Well, you give them the skills and the knowledge they need in order to take action in the time of a crisis. This can be from everything from earthquakes to some sort of military confrontation. But during those periods of time, understanding things like, here is the kind of information you should pay attention to and the kind of information you might be skeptical of, or here are some medical skills that you can learn that be useful for the rest of your life, whether we're talking about earthquakes or military problem. Or here's an evacuation plan, or ways that you can keep your family safe. The real problem in a crisis is when people are put in a very chaotic position, they can panic. And this panic can be lethal. That's the thing that, as a civil society, Taiwan needs to kind of look at, is how do we dramatically reduce the chaos and the panic among the population by empowering them with the knowledge and skills that they can use if there is a chaotic situation and a crisis situation that develops.
Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Really happy to be here.
For more content from TaiwanPlus, make sure to visit our website or check us out on social media. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.